Right. Thank you so much. All right, we've got our recording started so that people can watch us later. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you joining us today live, and those that are able to watch this later. Thanks again for tuning in. All right, turn that off. My name is Michelle Houghton. I am a Copic artist and most importantly, a Copic teacher. I have been doing this for a lot of years, actually about 16, 17 years now. I've been teaching people about Copic markers, and we're going to do a really fun technique with our markers today, using them in a totally different way. A few of you might have joined us like 2 weeks ago doing the same technique. It is the exact same class again. We had a high demand to show this technique off again because it's a really fun technique with our Copic markers and something totally different than coloring in an image or using them as a color medium. So it's just a different way to use them. Couple little introductory things that we go through every time we have class. So Copic markers are an alcohol-based marker, and that makes them unique. There are many alcohol-based markers out there, but the majority of us have used what are called a water-based marker. And all that means is the ink inside the marker is suspended in a fluid. And like our Crayolas that we used as a little kid, those are suspended in water. And so it gives the ink certain characteristics when you color and use those markers. Copic markers have the solution, or the liquid solution is an alcohol-based solution. And so the ink is suspended in that alcohol solution. That in turn changes the characteristics of the ink and what you can do with the ink. So one of the big things that alcohol markers allow you to do is to blend. And that's similar to a paint effect in that you can layer colors 1, 2, 3, 4, and more, and actually blend those colors together, similar to the way you would use paint, which is very unique. You cannot do that with a water-based marker. The other effect, the other thing about an alcohol-based marker is as you're layering those colors and adding 2 and 3 and 4 different colors on a single sheet of paper in a specific area, if you were using a water-based marker, that would actually eventually bead up that paper, kind of get it all knobby, and eventually truly tear through the paper. And that's the water that's doing that. With an alcohol-based marker, you stay on the surface and that alcohol is evaporating. So I can add all of those layers over and over again and blend and rework. I can let an image dry, come back to it and rework it again. And that is all due to that alcohol solution that's in the markers. Copic, the markers we're going to use today are these little Ciao markers. These are their smallest of their collections. And they are these little round tube markers. They have 2 separate ends with different nibs on them. We're going to be using that brush nib a lot today. And then you also have what's called a medium broad nib or a chisel nib. These of the Copic markers are the least expensive. And so for someone wanting to try out Copic markers, this is a great way to start. The ink is still refillable. The nibs are still replaceable. You get the exact same color combinations you do in the other markers. They're just in this kind of smaller, more compact body. So it's a great way to start. The other ones that Michael's carries are the sketch markers, and that's these kind of oval shaped markers. You'll see a lot of crafters using these, and there's some advantages to these. They are a little bit more expensive. So, but if I have a Y38, which is what this one is, if I have a Y38 in my Ciao, a Y38 in a sketch is exactly the same color. So there's no need to own both of them, just so you guys are aware of that. Copic in the world of alcohol markers is really probably the go-to marker for a lot of artists. And a couple reasons for that is that the alcohol solution in those markers, you can't smell it. It's not one that you can smell. When you open a cap on a lot of alcohol markers, there's a real distinct smell. You can smell that it has that alcohol base to it. And Copic markers do not have that. they've also been tested and are safe to use in an airbrush system that you can actually spray that ink out there and it's safe to use in that airbrush system. And it's one of the only alcohol markers that is allowed to say that, that can say that they've tested that and it's safe to do that with. And the ink is just gorgeous and blends beautifully, and it's just the best out there. So I think if you haven't tried them yet, it's worth trying them. Try them in a small group just to see what they can do and see if it's something you would use on your own crafting projects. All right, so we're going to shift over to the table and we'll get going on our project today. What we are going to be doing is, instead of coloring in an image, we're going to actually use our Copic markers on a stamp, and we're going to stamp with the Copic ink itself. So our goal is these 3 cards, and I've got all of my pieces cut out and ready to go, but the stamping is the part that you're going to really want to be seeing. So we're going to start right off the bat with that. And the fun part, first of all, I just think it's fun to find new ways to use a specific medium. And so finding different ways to use my Copic markers is awesome. But this is really fast and really simple. And so it allows you to mass produce a group of cards if you wanted to that have those Copic colors on them, whereas sitting and coloring a single image over and over again does take quite a bit of time. And so it's an easy way to do big bunches of cards. Before I start coloring, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, make sure about Copic, about what I'm doing, make sure to put those over in that comment section over to the side. My friend Shannon, who works for Copic, is also here today, and she's over in that chat area, and she is ready and willing to answer those questions. And if there's ones that she feels like really would help everybody, there's some pauses in our lesson today, and we'll bring those up and discuss those as a group. But make sure to add those in there, and Shannon will jump right on that and answer those for you. All right, sorry about that, Shannon. Okay, we are going to start with a couple different colors, and I've got a little group that I'm going to use. I've got 5 total, and I've got a yellow, I've got Y38, I've got a yellow red, which is my YR68. I've got another yellow that's quite a bit darker, and that's the Y28. And this one, it's not so much, it's darker, but it's also desaturated, which means it has some gray added in. So you can see the difference between those 2 yellows. This one has, that Y28 has quite a bit of gray added in. And then I have 2 earth tones. I've got an E57 and I've got an E49. And one of the things I love about Copic markers is, if you don't have these exact 5 markers, go find something similar and it's probably going to look almost the same. You're going to get really similar effects. It's not so much about the exact color number. So if you've got a nice warm yellow, you've got kind of a yellow red or orangey color, you've got kind of a goldeny yellow that's a little more almost earth tone looking, and then a couple earth tones, you're good to go. All right. So I'm going to start with my lightest color. And on this technique, I tend to work light to dark, because as I color, I'm overlapping, and you'll see on occasion a marker will pick up some of that other ink, and I'll show you what to do with that. But working light to dark is actually the most effective way to do this. So I am starting with that Y38, and this is a rubber stamp from Michaels. Notice it's very solid. And I know this is one that they're not carrying anymore, but they have several that are very similar to that. And we'll play around with one of those other sets here in a second too. But I'm going to kind of hit the treetops and the edges, kind of those side leaves. And I'm not going to be perfect because I can't really see like where they're overlapping, where one starts and the other stops. And it's not a precise technique. It's very kind of mush it around. Very artistic, formal term, mush it. So I'm getting kind of those outer edges where a tree oftentimes will get kind of golden. Then I'm switching to my orange, or my YR, which means yellow red, 6/8. And I'm going right up into those yellows and then filling more of that kind of center or core of that tree in. And it's just overlapping, it's kind of scribbling. And the fun part of this is there's not really, I can't really mess this up, which is nice. I've got my Y28, which is that yellow. If you look at the name on this one, it's called Lionette Gold, and the lids are almost metallic. Don't let that one fool you. It's not a metallic marker. It just is this kind of warm gold. It actually has almost a little bit of a green tint to it, but it has this, it works really well to create some deeper shadows in those yellows. So I'm going right into the core of the tree, maybe a little bit along the bottom of them with this one. And my guess is I probably picked up a little bit of that orange. So what, and I can't see it because the tip on this marker is so dark, but I'm going to come over on my scratch paper and just kind of scribble that off a little bit. And I can see there was a little bit of my yellow reds on the tip. So it's kind of important on some of these to scrape it, kind of just scribble a little bit, get that ink off before I recap that marker. So what I've got left is the trunks and the ground. And I'm going to start with my lighter of my two earth tones. And this is an E57. And I'm going to work my way up the trunk and a little bit into the tree, because a lot of these we can see those bottom little branches. So I'm going right up into the core of the tree. Maybe a few little pieces scooting off on each one of these. And then I'll hit the ground, but I'm going to get the ground darker here in just a second. So I'm not super concerned about that. And last but not least, the last one I picked out of my stash was an E49. Now this marker is almost black. Like it is as dark as you're going to get in those earth tones. So I'm going to go right across the ground, and that's going to help kind of ground my image. And then this is an optional. If you want to come up kind of one edge of the trunk. So I'm literally using kind of the side of my brush marker, brush nib, and coming right up one of the edges. And so I did it on the left edge of all of these trunks. It will not look as precise as that when I stamp it. So I've got this all colored up. It's very mottled looking and mixed, kind of mushed around. And if I stamp it now, if I flip it over and stamp it now, I literally get nothing, okay? Because the alcohol has already evaporated. It might be slightly tacky to the touch, but there's nothing there. Like the ink is not fluid enough to do anything. So in my little spray bottle, all this is a mini spray bottle. There's nothing magic about this. You can buy these from crafting companies. You can also just find them a lot of different places, but just a small mister. And what I have in the bottom of this is Copic Colorless Blender Solution. It's the refill for the Copic Colorless Blender. And it comes in two sizes. This is the current refill size, these guys here. And then this is the big boy if you're using a lot of this stuff. And I have just a little bit in the bottom. Now I highlight that because if I fill this up and leave it sitting on a shelf, this little mister is not airtight. And so on its own, it will literally evaporate just sitting on the shelf. So I do a tiny bit in the bottom, and you could either seal it up in a bag if you want, or just put a tiny bit in it, just enough so that it'll spray. And that way I'm not wasting this. I'm using it up and tucking it away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mister and I'm going to spray, kind of move my paper out of the way, about 2 or 3 times, just getting that whole surface wet. And I can actually see the ink moving around. I'm thinking I didn't get that top because I can see it. Center it up, and this is a watercolor paper. and press that down nice and tight.
Michelle.
Yes.
Oh, it looks so pretty. We do have some questions on the paper you're using.
Yes.
So I heard watercolor paper. Is it hot press?
So this is just a generic crafters, like student grade watercolor paper. This, I honestly don't know if it's hot or cold press.
Okay.
The reason I tend to use watercolor paper for this technique is because you get all of this kind of watery mottled look. And I feel like the watercolor paper allows that to move around a little bit more. So what you can see on mine, so I honestly, you can do this on your plain white cardstock. It doesn't have to be watercolor paper. And a lot of us, if you're a Copic marker person, already have that smooth white cardstock. This technique will absolutely work on that. I like the look of the watercolor paper, but it's not a necessity to this technique. This is a really inexpensive, I got it in a like little 9x12 sketchbook form. And it truly is like your student grade, inexpensive watercolor paper. So what we can see is this kind of watery wash look of the image, the Copic image that we colored. Now you can see over on my left side, it didn't get like as watery. It didn't stamp as well. What's happened is I didn't get as much of the alcohol solution over here. And you can actually see the ink still sitting on the stamp. It didn't get wet. Now, if I have a rubber stamp that I can put on a stamp platform, I could literally spray this again and stamp it again because everything's locked down in place. I could stamp it a second time. But with a wood stamp, I'm kind of done after one stamp. So I do my best, get it all wet and then stamp. I can still see the tree. And we experimented with this a little bit the last time we got together, in that I could take my colorless blender marker and I can actually come in and soften a little bit of this. All I'm doing is kind of circling right on top of those areas that got that little bit of ink, but that didn't get as liquidy, as washed as the other ones. And that actually does move that ink around a little bit and softens that effect and fills some of that in. Now you can kind of watch your colorless blender. You might need to kind of scrub a little bit of that yellow off, but that'll give you that kind of watery technique if you missed. The other question we had last time, and this is a great question, was can you just use like rubbing alcohol in your little spray bottle? So what we discovered, because some people were actually experimenting with that while we were doing class, is that it's going to depend on the percentage of alcohol in your solution. So a gal was trying to use like a 70%, right around that range, kind of just your standard rubbing alcohol that you get at the drugstore, and it was not working. And so getting it up to that more 90+ percentile out of the rubbing alcohol will work. And people were having okay success with that too. So if you didn't have the colorless blender solution, you could absolutely try that as well.
Oh, Michelle.
I
have a few questions if it's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start coloring again, and I'm literally coloring the same pattern, so we can absolutely answer a few questions.
Okay,
Go
yeah.
for it.
So I did have a question earlier in the chat about cleaning your rubber stamp. And so I suggested using the zero colorless blender to kind of spray and remove the ink once you're done, if there's any left over. Is there any kind of way you clean your wood block stamps like this?
I do have a technique. Thank you, Shannon. And we are actually going to do that after I stamp this.
Okay, so that will basically answer their question.
We are definitely going to talk about cleaning, because that is a common question. Because you can see, even as I'm coloring, I mean, there's residue on there. And so we are going to want to clean it at the end, because it won't just wash off with regular water or your baby wipes. It won't. So we will need to do a little bit of cleaning, and I will definitely include that here as we get done with this image.
Okay. And then we have another question.
Yes.
That said, does this technique only work on red rubber stamps, or can you use it on a clear stamp as well?
Good question. So I have found for me that the rubber stamps work better. And I think honestly, it's because they are stiffer. I have tried doing this on acrylic and polymer, clear polymer and acrylic stamps, and they're so soft in comparison that as I stamp it, a lot of times it kind of mushes out, if that kind of makes sense. It bleeds out over the image. I don't, even though this is still a watery look, I have these clean defined edges. And I feel like with the acrylic and polymer images, I definitely got softer edges. It moved around quite a bit more. And the other piece of that is you don't often find polymer stamps, although I mean there are some, but what you're looking for is these nice solid images where like an outline, which is what Copic users are usually coloring. A lot of times those are in the polymer, is that one that is just an outline, and that does not work very well with this technique either. We're really filling in, and so I'm looking for a solid stamp. And you can absolutely try the acrylic polymer. The cleaning would be even more important on those. When we get to that cleaning, you would definitely want to make sure to clean it kind of with this two-step process. But just know that you're not going to get as crisp an image, and that absolutely. So it's not that you can't, it's just, again, you're going to, I have found better success with the rubber.
Gotcha. And another question I have is, so right now you're at the point where you're going to spray the actual stamp to reactivate
Yep.
the pigment. Now,
Mhm.
what if you sprayed the paper instead?
That is a really good question. When we tested second color here in a second, why don't we do that? And we'll
Okay.
try it, because I was
Yeah.
going to do that anyway. And we'll give it a try.
Okay.
So one of my cards is a slimline card. And so on it, I'm going to come over to one side and stamp. And see, this one was really wet. And you can see the difference. And so every time I stamp this, it's going to look completely different. And so at home, if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, here's the same person doing the exact same steps, and this is the difference I'm getting. So, and I've done this like 100 times over, literally this stamp. So know that every time you do this, it's going to look different, and go with it. Just enjoy that process and play with it. I was trying to make sure I got all my corners and got a lot of moisture on there. So we're going to do this one more time to fill in our slim line. And then we're going to play around with a different little color group just for fun, to show you how you can make this completely different. Are there any other questions we can answer while we're coloring away, Shannon?
I'm looking here.
All right, you're good.
Yeah, I did have a question about like keeping your art archival, and I was just about to type this in, so I might as well say it.
Yeah.
To preserve my art, since the natural pigments of Copic will fade over time due to the alcohol, pigment, I use a Krylon UV resistant spray. Or you can, if you want to choose a UV resistant glass frame, if you're making art you want to frame. However, when it's a nice day outside, because I always do it outside, never indoors for ventilation purposes, I use a UV resistant spray, and that will definitely preserve your the alcohol pigment. If there's anything else that you use, Michelle, definitely say
it. Those are actually the two things I would actually recommend. And I don't think people realize that with Copic, that it's not going to last forever. And especially if it's in a well-lit area that's getting like direct sunlight, and it will fade over time. But no, the Krylon spray is the most common. But the key about ventilated, that those are toxic. Those are really heavy scents and sprays. So you want to make sure your outdoors are really well ventilated.
Exactly. And I know if you ever work with Copic ink as like the refill bottles, like Michelle's using the liquid form of the ink, not the marker form right there. if you're using Copic ink as well, definitely be in a well-ventilated area too. Not, I mean, you don't have to necessarily with just the markers, but when you're using just ink, I would definitely recommend it.
So I'm eyeballing and just kind of lining this up as best I can, and we'll see how similar or different this one is. But now I've got an entire kind of row of trees. So these two will be ready to go on 2 of my cards. And then I cheated and I have one more stamped for our 3rd card. So those will be all ready to put together. But before we do that, let's talk about 2 things. First of all, cleaning the stamp. So hopefully you can see this. There's still quite a bit of orange and there's a little bit of the earth tone and stuff on there. So I use kind of a 2-part cleaning process. The first is I would definitely try to get as much of that ink off, and I have to use alcohol. I can't use a baby wipe or just a lot of us use chamois now with water on them. That's not going to work on this. It's just going to sit there. That ink is solid on that rubber. So I'm either going to use more of my Copic Colorless blender solution, or you can use that kind of 90% plus. I've had some luck cleaning off with that lower percentage rubbing alcohol, like the 70, especially for cleaning when I'm not trying to do a technique. Sometimes that will help. So what I do is I'm either going to get it on a paper towel, or I'm actually literally just going to spray again on that stamp. And then I'm going to use a paper towel to come in and press kind of as hard as I can, just directly on that rubber. And the reason I just kind of push in with my fingers is that's going to get down into some of those little nooks and crannies and pull that alcohol and then the ink that's kind of sitting in it up. Now, like most stamping inks, I'm going to do this probably a couple times. Like most stamping inks, I'm probably going to get a tiny bit of staining that does not disappear. So I might have a little bit of an orange tint when I'm done for the day. But my goal is to get the big stuff off and get as much of it out as possible. And I usually can get like almost all that earth tone is off of that little land area now. I've got most of it, but this stamp now, I'm trying to think, I've done at least like 20 or so prints with this one. So I've colored it up with my inks, and you know, at some point it's got to get down into that rubber a little bit. So that's step 1, get as much of that ink off as possible. And you will have to use alcohol to do that. Step 2 is to protect your stamp, because the alcohol solution, as it's evaporating, it also pulls the moisture out of the rubber. And so the second step that I use, and you can do this with just like a paper towel again, or you can do it with one of these little stamp cleaner systems, but I use an actual stamp cleaner. And a lot of these have a little bit of a moisturizer. It's not a lotion per se, but it has a little bit of oil in it to help condition the stamp. And so I always will come in, and my second step of cleaning is to always use one of those stamp cleaners. Even though it's not pulling any more ink off, it's adding a little bit of moisture back into that rubber. And I feel like over time, if this, I mean, this is really what I would use the stamp for, is doing this Copic technique. And so all of that alcohol over time will eventually kind of break down that rubber. But if I condition it each time I'm done with a little bit of that stamp cleaner that has that little bit of oil or moisture in it, it's going to actually keep my stamp in good shape. So if you decide to try either a polymer or a clear acrylic, that would be even more important to use that second step. Once you have as much of the Copic ink off as possible, make sure you go in and use a stamp cleaner that has that little bit of conditioner. And actually, I would think a baby wipe a lot of times even has that little bit of moisturizer in it. And that's why a lot of people have shifted to cleaning their stamps with that. It's going to help condition that stamp and keep it in good shape. All right, so I'm going to set this guy off to the side.
Oh, Michelle,
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
We do have a lot of folks in the chat that wanted to see what it looked like when you wet the paper first, and they're really wanting to see that. So do you have I know this is part of your demo. Do you have a scrap sheet of paper where you can just show that really quick? Or
That's what I'm doing now.
okay, never mind. I'll be quiet.
It's okay.
Sorry.
So no, I just wanted to share because this particular stamp is, I know that I got it at Michael's, and if you have a local Michael's that still carries it, that's awesome. But there's a chance you couldn't find this one. There's like 2 or 3 sets of little, like smaller trees or different of these kind of solid images for wood stamps or different stamps that you could use and do the exact same technique on. So we're going to do this. We're going to pull out some different colors. I'm going to pull out some greens instead, and we're going to play around with this little guy. But the first thing I was going to do is we're going to spray this end. So we're going to color the stamp, and then we're going to spray the paper first and do the stamp and see what happens. And this one actually has some ink on it already because I was playing around with it earlier, kind of reminding myself what those colors were that I played with last time. And this is a G82. So it's a fairly light green. So even though it's an 8 to start, remember that tells us how much gray is in the marker. That last number, that 2 at the end, tells us that it's a really light marker. And I'm definitely going to wipe this off because I know I picked up some leftover ink. So I'm going to scribble that off. Then I've got, let's see, let's do this next, G94. So this has got a lot of gray in it. And I'm going to go more heavily on this left side and kind of horizontally across, show those evergreen boughs. And then I've got a G28. Which if you've ever worked with the green family, the G28 is one of those really dark colors. So again, I'm going to focus this over on the left side and especially near that bottom corner. All right. And then I'll pull I'm just going to use my darkest earth tone that I had, that E49. Come in a little bit from the bottom. So let's try this. We are going to spray. I'm gonna have to hold it up. I put just the right amount in so I don't waste my solution, but then, so this is wet, kind of from here to here. Let's see what it does. Aha, our answer. So there you go. That actually worked incredibly well. So you could do a single, or you could pull this little set that I found has 5 little trees in it. You could do a combination of those, or you could line up a little group and kind of stack them in there and make your own little tree line. But it looks like we could definitely do the paper as well. I'm glad you guys asked that because that was not one that I had tried. So it's still damp, but I'm not sure. I think I'm gonna, we'll see what happens because that might, it's gonna reactivate some of that ink that's sitting right there. I have to say, I love when a student asks a really great question like that and we learn something new. So I think what you'd want to do if you were doing the spray the paper version is you'd want to have, like, this would be hard to do with a single stamp because as I'm re-wetting the paper, you can kind of see what happened to my first tree. It started moving more and kind of bleeding more because it got hit again with the alcohol solution. So I might, on this technique, I'd either want to use a bigger stamp that filled the whole thing, or if I was just putting, maybe this is going to be a name card for my table. And so I was just going to put a single tree on each one. I think it would work really, really well for that. But as soon as I come in and want to add another tree, if I respray that paper, and I think you'd have to, like, this is just damp now, and I don't think you'd get the same effect. And we can try that. My guess is you're going to hit those other trees. So let's do this. I'm going to do the alcohol first and say, okay, so if I had the alcohol wet and sitting there and then colored my next tree, is that going to be wet enough to pull that image off? And I don't know the answer. So we're going to find out. All right, we've got our greens. Get a little earth tone at the bottom for a trunk. So it's still cool to the touch. It did work. So depending on how fast you are, you'd have to be fairly quick, but you probably could put multiple trees, even just recoloring really fast and stamping again. It looks like that. We'll do it one last time, and then we're going to put our cards together. We'll kind of push this. We're doing our testing here today.
Oh, Michelle, we have a suggestion in the chat that says maybe you can put a piece of paper on top of the ones that you've already applied. To kind of protect it, essentially.
Yeah, no, and that would absolutely work as well. You'd want something like a cardstock that has some like heft to it, but I'll bet that would work. So not as well that time. It was dry enough that it didn't stamp quite as well. You still have an image and you could go back with your marker and do that. But what I'm understanding is someone suggested we take a different piece of paper, and I'm not going to do it with this one. I don't have a scrap nearby. But if I covered these trees and sprayed this area, my guess, Shannon, on that, you might have just a tiny bit right at the edge, because that is going to pull the moisture kind of up and under through the paper itself. It'll kind of pull that moisture. So you might get a tiny bit of bleeding, but it wouldn't be the entire tree. You would protect a lot of it, but you might get just a little bit of fuzziness at the edge, would be my guess. So the fun part about this technique to me is it's fast, really quick, and then also I can take a single stamp and do all sorts of different colors on it. As soon as I've got it cleaned up, I can switch gears and do this in yellows and browns. I could do all sorts of different things, and I don't have to, and I could do a whole set with seasonal trees with the same stamps, just changing up my Copic markers, and I can do big groups of them. I don't have to, it's going to go pretty fast. So there's the stamping portion of our class today. Now we're going to switch and get some cards put together. So I'm going to move a few things, get those off the table. So we've got 3 cards. These are what we're aiming for. 2 of that kind of A4 standard size, and then 1 is a slim line. And we've got all of our images. We've got these 2, and then we've got 1 more. So I've got all my images ready to go, and I have already pre-cut all of my pieces, and I'm going to hold up kind of close to the camera, and I'll kind of read, let's see, drop it toward me. These are all of the measurements that I use. So I'm going to hold this here, and if people want to take a screenshot of it, they can, but I'll kind of read them off. So my images are trimmed to 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. That's the 2 smaller ones. And then the longer one is a 3 by 8. Those are the images. Then I have some white cardstock that is my card bases. I have two that are your standard 8.5 by 5.5. And I have one slimline that is 8.5 by 7. Those are the white cardstock. Then I have what I'm calling a yellow pattern paper. It is this kind of gold mottled. It's not metallic, but it has kind of a gold finished like look to it to me, kind of a yellowish paper. Those are actually the entire card front on all three cards. So I have two that are 5.5 by 4.25. Again, it covers the entire card front. And then my third one is that slimline card front, 3.5 by 8.5. Then I have a wood grain paper. Looks like this. It's a dark wood grain. And on those, I have two that are 4.25 by 4.5. I have two of them that size. And then I have one that is 3 1/8 by 8 1/8 slimline. Then I have three little pieces of vellum, or two pieces, sorry, two pieces. They only go on the smaller cards. Saying it incorrectly. I have one that's 4.25 by 3.25. And then I have one that's truly a square. It is 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. Okay. There's all the measurements. I've held this up for a while. I'm setting it down and we're going to make some cards. So the first one, I've got my card base. It's folded and it's going to open at the bottom. I've got my card front with this kind of mottled yellow goldish paper. I have my monster tape runner. And you can use any adhesive that you want. I am famous for sticking something down and then having to tear it up. So I'll try to be really careful today. See if I can get it squared away right from the start. So that goes straight down. Then I'm going to actually put my two layers directly on top of this. The first is my wood grain. Let's see. That way. So it's going to go all the way from side to side. Make sure I've got the right, yes, pieces going with this. So I am a classic eyeballer. I don't measure things, but if you want to, you could measure. This is going to start right at the top edge of my card at the fold. And I'm looking to see if I can get it about centered and stick that down. There's layer 2. Layer 3 is going to be my vellum, and it's going to sit pretty much right in the center of the wood grain. One small note here. My trees are going to sit on top of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tape or my adhesive, whatever I'm using, on my vellum. I'm going to kind of put it right toward the center. And that way, when I put my image on top, I'm not going to be able to see the adhesive. On occasion with a vellum, you can see where those tape marks are. You don't see it very much on this wood grain paper, but you can sometimes still see it a little bit. Center that as best as possible. Actually, you can on this one. So you can see exactly where that tape mark is. And so by putting it where I know that image is going to sit, now I don't see it at all. Just an easy, quick tip. And then I'm going to use some foam little squares, and you could use foam tape or foam dots, or if you want a really flat card and not have the extra dimension, you can just tape this down as well. I like adding kind of one layer on images. The trick is then peeling all of your little squares off. And some days mine want to cooperate and other days they do not. There we go. But I have one of those crafting rooms that you find these little squares everywhere. And then I tend to like the look of having a little bit more weight at the bottom of my images or my complete little piece of artwork. So even on a card, I tend to take this a little bit higher than center, and it adds a little bit of weight at the bottom. And I feel like that really balances it nicely. So there's card number 1, easy peasy. Set that to the side, and we're going to grab our second set of kind of this A4. This one is going to have its fold at the side. Starts exactly the same. We're going to tape down that gold mottled paper. And all of these papers that I have were ones that I found at Michael's. And I'm pretty sure we put the links in the class kind of supply list. The wood grain is going to sit directly on top of that again. So no tricks there. Again, trying to center that as best I can. A lot of times I would kind of stand up and get right on top of that to make sure I'm getting things lined up. And then I've got this vellum, and I'm going to double check. I want it to hit the edges. So I do want that 4 1/4 so I can get that full width. But what I did on this one is I gave it that rough edge and I tore the top and bottom. Now, if you don't like the look of that, this is my finished one. It has this little rough edge on each side. If you don't care for the look of that, you can absolutely leave it just like this. But I'm going to come along and I'm going to use my pointer and my thumb on both hands. And for me, I'm a righty. My left hand is kind of holding it stable so that it doesn't just tear out across the whole page. And I'm just working my way down and tearing off this thin strip. And I'm going to come over to the other side and do the exact same thing. And there's rulers that you can use that like you tear along and it works really, really well. So I have this little tear on both sides, top and bottom. And this one, I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to stick that image right onto that vellum, and then I'm going to pop the vellum and the image up. So adhesive on my image, and the image will go all the way from one side to the other. Not perfectly centered there, but I'm not going to rip it off today. I tell people this all the time too. I'm careful about, I send my handcrafted cards to people who appreciate them and that aren't going to sit there and go, oh my gosh, you have a little edge there that's off, Michelle, you're a little cockeyed today. They won't like make mention of that. I send my cards to people who will love them and get great pleasure out of them. So there's certain people that get my most special cards that I spent hours on, because those are the people that ooh and ah and sometimes even frame them. And I know who they are. So those are the people who I send those little artworks to. So one of the reasons I love this technique though is it's so fast. I can do tons of these and send them to all my friends and family. There is card number 2. So now we've got that dimension under the vellum this time. My last one is my slimline card. So this is 8.5 by 7. And I'm going to fold it so that it is now 8.5 by 3.5. That is my slimline measurement. If you haven't played around with a slimline, this is going to fit in a business envelope. It just slides right in. It's really fun and easy. And so I think a lot of people have gotten into this card format. So once again, we are going to put some adhesive on our pattern paper that's going to cover. I'm going to stand up just a little so I can see that one a little better. Get that one on. And then two options here. You could go ahead and attach your brown wood grain to that gold, or you can attach your image and pop those up. So you can either just pop the image up or pop the image and its frame up. I've done it both ways now. So I think today I'm going to attach the image to my wood grain. So I'm going to center that as best I can. And this is a tiny, tiny. There is not much going to show. It's just enough. I like having that really crisp edge. And I feel like if I put that image just on top of that gold, I lose a little bit. But by adding that dark brown, I feel like it really frames it out and I can see it that much better. A little insight into why I'm doing some of the things I do. Most of my cards are very simple.
Michelle.
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Of course.
Do you ever have issues with postage at the post office, mailing cards that kind of stick out at all?
So most of mine are like this, in that I've done like one layer, like a foam, and so it has that one layer popped up. I personally have never had an issue now, but I also just stick a stamp on it and stick it in the mail versus going into the post office and having them kind of feel it and tell me, oh, no, you need more postage. I have made a few cards where maybe they have this layer of foam, but then I've added a button on top, or I've added a ribbon that goes over it and a tie. Most of the time then instead of going into the post office, I'll just add an extra stamp, because I do know if it gets caught in the machine, like that they prefer that you have a little bit more on there so they can kind of hand sort it. But with a single layer like this, where I've just done the one kind of bump up, I've never had anybody say, ooh, like not get it, or they had postage due, or had something returned to me because it had that layer. I've not had an issue. Sorry, I know this is like the tedious part of the card making right here. Is watching me peel these little guys off.
And you use like a tape runner, and then you also have these foam like cubes essentially. So
yes.
Do you use just the foam cubes typically for elevating, like you are raising it off the page, and then otherwise everything else is just the tape runner?
For me, that's my typical go-to, Shannon. If I can find it, so one of the ones that Michael's carries is actually, this is a foam tape. And I like the foam tape, but this one is pretty, like, you barely get any lift. I can't remember if it's like a 1/16 of an inch thick. Every once in a while, they have a little bit thicker foam tape, and I like it a little bit thicker. If I'm going to put the foam under it, I want it to be kind of visibly lifted. So I'll use foam tape or foam dots or squares like this. And then the tape runner is what I usually use to stick things together. The other one, though, you will see me use on a semi-regular basis is a wet adhesive, like a crafting glue. And that, there's a couple advantages to that. A lot of times you can shift things. So if I'm worried about getting things lined up, if I use a little bit of glue, it has a little bit of wiggle before it sticks. And so I can shift it around, where the tape, as soon as you touch that and it makes that connection, you're done. Like it's stuck. And to get it off, you're tearing a lot of times. So I will use the glue, and there's other things where that glue allows for a little bit stronger hold, or if it has a little tiny detail that I've cut around, I can get a little tiny bit of glue on that, and I know that's going to stay stuck down versus get caught on things like going in and out of an envelope. So a wet adhesive, I also have those, and I'll use it, just not as regularly as the tape runner. So these are my 3 cards. And we could obviously, if I don't have anything ready for it, but my little Christmas tree guys, I could make another card out of that. Although I was just playing around with that. But this is what we were aiming for today, and we have got them. And I'm going to share. We've got this page that we share at the end of each of our classes that has all of our kind of social media info. So I'm going to set that down there and you guys can get a good look at that. So everything over here on the left column, this is Copic. So if you'd like to see more inspiration, more information about Copic goings on and people creating with Copic markers, this is where you can find it here in the US. This is kind of all of theirs. And then over on the right column, this is me. So if you're interested in more Copic classes, I actually, from my blog, have a newsletter. I am doing some online classes. I have a couple that are out there now, and I have a brand new one coming out in November, pre-selling for the new year. And then my Instagram and Facebook, and I apologize that they're a little bit different, but if you catch me on Instagram at K Michelle Houghton, you can get all of this other information in the link in my bio. So you can get to all of those spots. And then if you create these cards, we would love, love, love if you would share it with the hashtag Make It With Michaels, because Michaels is always looking for artists that are creating and using their curriculum so they can share it out there in social media land. So there is all of that. But thank you, everyone.
I just have one quick thing.
Yeah.
Earlier in the chat, maybe like 10 minutes ago, somebody requested to see your stamp scrubber, like the cleaner, I believe. Just one more time. I think just flash it across the screen.
So just the cleaner, the stuff.
Yes.
So this is a water-based stamp cleaner. It's actually this one was made by Ranger, and I know Michael still carries this. I'm purposefully covering up the little price sticker because I think I got this maybe 8 to 10 years ago.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no way that it costs the same amount.
Gotcha.
But you can see it's lasted forever. But this is one that's actually made by Ranger. And I know I actually saw it there even a few months ago. I'm pretty sure they still carry it, but it would be something equivalent to that. But it's a water-based stamp cleaner. It literally says it's a stamp cleaner. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. And then are your cards underneath this right here? I think a few people just want to see the cards one more time.
Absolutely. I'll scoot that off. This is why we're here. So let's put those back up.
Perfect.
Yes.
It's always fun to see them laid out when they're nice and finished. And obviously we can tell too of like certain like one area is a little got more zero blender to it because it has a little bit more bleed, and one has a little bit more of a dry brush effect if you're using the actual watercolor. So it's really fun. Yes.
Yeah. And I think I have 3 sets of them, like literally all the way completed now. So, but I mean, you can see literally every time I stamp this, it looks different. Every single time I put that the ink on and stamp it again, it looks different. And so, but it's a fun way to get a bunch of cards all at once. So yeah.
It definitely brings out your inner artistic touch too. So you can tell everything is handmade. It's not just machine processed or printed digitally or whatnot. So it's always fun to see that handmade stuff. It really is.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. I see all the comments in the chat are just high compliment towards you, Michelle. And a lot of people liked the class. I know that this class will be up on the Michael's YouTube channel within a few days. So you can watch it again. And hopefully if you missed something, we cover it verbally in that video recording. And we have another Michael's class coming up. I will actually be the one presenting it the 12th on Friday of November. So we'll have another class there. But I think that's about it, Michelle. We really, really appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise.
Thanks. And honestly, if they had questions specifically about the class, even if they watched it again, if you contact me through social media, I mean, I'm going to answer it there. I'm a teacher. That's what I do. I enjoy sharing this information. So reaching out and contacting me through Instagram or Facebook or any of those, I will hop right on that. So, yep.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. Thank you everybody for coming and playing along with us, and have a very happy, colorful week.